Okay, I'm going to tell you about my marathon progressions. And the reason I'm going to tell you is I'm going to tell you about all the mistakes I made. I'm going to tell you about all the good things I did and all the things that I would change if I was to restart today. And then you can insert those things and lessons into your game to become a better, faster athlete. Now, just a bit of background. As a kid, I was obsessed with football. And so what that meant, when I did my first running race, aged 11, I won the cross-country race at high school, became captain of the cross-country team, and it put me into this positive flywheel that was really fun. I was winning races, I was getting onto other sports teams. But when I left high school, I just carried on with my football and my rugby, and I didn't run. And so the next time I ran was literally, I got into a career, sat at a laptop all day, recruitment career, highly competitive environment. I absolutely loved it. But it was very, very much indicative of the life that I was leading in Manchester at the time. I took a gap year, went cycle touring in Asia, initially for 6 to 8 weeks. It ended up becoming 12 months. And during that cycling, just literally waking up in the morning and cycling as far as you possibly can to a village, getting a bed for the night, sleeping again and going again, I loved it. I loved the pursuit, the endurance. I loved what I was seeing along the way. For me, it was the perfect life. So I promised myself on the last proper leg of that journey from Bangkok to Singapore that I'm going to start running. Once I get back to my base camp in Thailand, I'm going to start running again. I'm just going to go out for an hour run. So when I got back, and it was literally January the 3rd, 2010, I got back, intended to go out for an hour run, and lasted no more than 400 meters. And I walked back to the house. I thought I'd injured myself. I hadn't paced it. The cycling fitness hadn't translated across, but I had the bug and I absolutely loved running. And I knew that if I put the right things in place and learned a little bit about the game, I would have super steep progression. And that is what we're aiming for. That initial progression that you get from starting in running, from inserting some structure, putting the intervals to work, to the long run to work, building that endurance, seeing it all come together. How do we keep those levels of gains? Hopefully you can get something from this video. See what I did wrong, see what I did right, change your game to make it really work for you. So after getting back to Manchester, this was April 2010, I got involved in a couple of park runs. I ran 18:30, I'd run a bit slower before, but on my own. And I was just super competitive. I was racing with everybody. I wanted to win. And the next race, I think it was just 3 weeks later, around 16:30 or 16:20. So there was some natural ability there that I had as a kid that I was tapping into again. But then I got into a 10K, Bupa Manchester 10K in May. I got on the start line. I thought, I've got to win this race. And there was Gabriel Alessi there was Mo Farah. It was completely irrational to think that I could do 5 months of training and win the Bupa Manchester 10K. But that's how I felt. And I loved those butterflies and that feeling. It made me feel alive. And in that race, I had to stop 3 or 4 times in order to sort of get my breath back and go again. But I had to finish. And I finished in something like 39:50. But it was the worst, most poorly executed race I can possibly think of. But I posted the picture, the first time I saw a picture of myself running, I posted it on Facebook, and a friend of a friend invited me, said, why don't you come and do the 50K uphill, Subido Pico Valletta in Granada? And I didn't even know anything about ultra running. I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't know that people were running more than a marathon. And so for me, it was just a challenge. I accepted it. I was training on a treadmill on an incline in Sweden where I lived, and I just wanted to survive the race. I just wanted to get under the cutoff time of 8 hours, and so that's exactly what I did. So here you'll get an idea of how I got into ultra running first, what it actually meant for my marathon time, how the things sort of relate, and then I'll try to explain the mistakes and the things that I did right. So 2010, I went to that race. So after starting in January the 3rd, doing a couple of 5Ks, doing the Bupa Manchester 10K in May, then in August, so literally 3 months later, I ran 50K uphill in 5 hours 17 and was 38th place. And I couldn't be more happy with that. I was absolutely over the moon. And I remember, as I say quite often, I remember looking at the podium, and all the people I looked up to in the past were just nothing compared to these guys. They were just fit for purpose, incredibly fit, the muscles in the legs that I didn't even know existed. And I just wanted to be like them. And my question then was, how do I become a professional runner? How do I make Granada my home? And how do I get better in this race? And that was the key thing for me. How do I get better in this race? And number one point, how do I move to Granada, is part of that sum. So then 2011, I signed up for Barcelona Marathon. My goal was 3 hours, sub 3 hours. I went there around 1:29 in the first half, had a shocking second half, wheels completely fell off, 3,000 people passed me. It was humbling. And that was a great lesson for me. I ran 3 hours 25 in 2011. But August that year, I went back to Valletta and I ran 30 minutes quicker in 4 hours 47. So massive improvement, and that got me 24th place. 2012, I was then living in Granada, Alameda, Granada, and I was training like a professional athlete. I had my business, still needed to make money, but in my head, I was completely a professional runner with the idea that I need to save as much money as I can so I can back myself for a year without having to work, and that was my plan. In 2012, I ran Seville Marathon. I remember driving over there with Mick, a friend of mine. We stayed at this hotel, awful hotel, where there was a party going on that night. Didn't sleep until like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. But that time in the morning, I was on my phone doing the calculations of what time I would be happy with. And I figured out that I wasn't happy just coming back and trying to do what I tried to do last year, to run a sub 3 marathon. What I really wanted to do was run much faster. And I figured that I was capable of sub 240. So the next day, Seville Marathon, I ran the first half in 1:19 and the second half a minute quicker in 1:18 and came back in 2 hours 37. And I was absolutely over the moon. I also had a breakthrough in the Valletta race that year and came 8th and ran 4 hours 17. Didn't do a marathon in 2013. But I went back to Valletta, I ran slower, and I remember that I went for it and the wheels fell off a little bit in the final 10K, but I still came 8th. 2014, I went back to Seville and went even quicker, 2 hours 24. And at that point, a new level of seriousness. And to me, in 2010, I'd already figured that in order for me to be as good as I possibly can in running, I need to find my niche, and that's going to be ultra running and trail running. And so I've got to go long. And so these marathons, the aim for me was I just want to run a 220 marathon, and that's going to make me a great 100K runner, because that's round about what the best 100K runners in the world were doing at that point, 2010, 2011. So I ran Seville Marathon 2014 in 2 hours and 24 minutes. And I went back to Valletta, same time as 2012, pretty much, 4 hours 18 at 5th place. And I remember that year, I pushed it too much. I was starting to feel Achilles problems for the first time, and I was overtraining, essentially. I still didn't have a coach. I was doing weight training, but I'd only started weight training sort of 2013. There was lots that I was trying to do, but I wasn't doing it in the right way. 2015, I didn't do a marathon, but I went back to Valletta, and I came 3rd in 4 hours and 3 minutes. So I felt like I'd finally cracked the course. I'd finally figured out what it took in order to get close to the podium, and I got on the podium. First place was a guy who's won London Marathon twice, won New York and Chicago. Really, really good runner. So it was a good pedigree of race. And at that point, sort of like 2013, 2014, 2015, I'd started to win trail races, 50 miles trail races, 50K trail races, a little bit further, different variations of those, but very hilly. I was always good at going uphill because of the Valletta race. 2016, went to London Marathon, and this was my first time competing in the UK for a long time. Went there to run a sub 220, which seemed rational after running 224 in 2014. Went through halfway in 67 or 68 minutes, came back, and again, the wheels fell off. But because I was running on home territory and I had lots of friends watching, I had to finish. So I came back. Was it a sensible thing to do? I don't know, but I came back in 227. By that point, I was already winning other marathons in crazy places like Southeast Asia and the rest of Asia, and sort of running 230, 235, 227. It was pretty comfortable for me. And that year, I was the favorite for Valletta. So I trained like an animal towards it. I did more training probably than I should. I left no stone unturned. I got to the race, I was completely focused, and I just overcooked it. I just overdid it. And with, I think, 38K or 40K to go, gone, somebody passed me and looked really fresh, a guy called Christabel. 43K, everything was slipping away from me. I came to set the course record and win the race. I didn't do either. And at that point, I didn't feel as if I could finish. My stomach was doing crazy things. I just, my head went. And it's still a regret to this day, but it was my only DNF at the Veta race. The previous year, and this is kind of like, if I look at 2017, this is me having a bee in my bonnet, being like a dog with a bone. It all sort of came together properly in 2017. So I went to London again to run 220. We went through, it was a windy day, especially in the first half, and we went through halfway in 111, and I did the second half in 110, a negative split, which is pretty rare at London. So 2017, I ran 221 and got on the England team. 3 weeks later, I won the British Championships 100K in 6 hours 42, which got me on the Great Britain team. But I was way more excited about the Veta race. And I went there, I was incredibly focused, didn't even speak to anybody, which is very unlike me on the start line. But I had a plaster on my wrist that told me all the times that I needed to hit at each checkpoint in order to break the course record. And that's what I did. I ran 3:45, course record by 5 minutes. And I hold the 2 fastest times on that course still. And it was without doubt my favorite victory. It was everything that I'd set out to do in 2010. It was like this perfect story arc for me. The failure in 2016, then the winning it and setting the course record. I set a line under the race and was just like, okay, I've kind of made peace with this race, and I sort of put it to bed. And then started to do different other races, and I won some other races, set course records. But my point is with this, is I did those 5Ks initially in 2010. I got into training, learned how to train a little bit, dived into a 10K, probably a little bit too soon, then dived into a 50K uphill, one of the world's hardest races. My mistake was I dived into the bigger distances too quick. Not even marathon, but ultra marathon. And what I should have done is become a better 5K runner and a better 10K runner. Boxed off those shorter distances. That would have meant that, running for a club, cross country in the winter, track and field in the summer, really tapping into that raw speed, that would have had a much bigger impact on the rest of my running. And that's what you can do, and that's what you should do. Whenever anybody gets into running, they're always very quickly, I'm going to run a marathon in 9 months, so I'm going to run a marathon in 3 weeks. And I always feel to myself and try to give the advice that you're way better. I know the distance is impressive, but it's way more impressive if you get the very best out of your body at running 5K than it is to get 20 or 30% away, but run the marathon. Way more impressive to run a fast 5K. And so I should have tapped into that. What I also should have done is got a coach. When I look at my sort of that first 10 years, in running, I was living in Granada, I was living the winters in Chiang Mai. I was living exactly the perfect life that I wanted. In order to make myself the best possible runner and hit the goals that I haven't yet and didn't hit, like the World Championship win for 100K, world record 100K, that would have been way easier with a coach and way easier if I would have focused on those initial goals. The world record at the time when I got into 100K running was 6 hours and 13 minutes. I knew that was a weak record. I knew it was ready to be broken. I think it hadn't been broken for 10. It had gone from 6:18 to 6:13. So when you take 5 minutes off a record, even if it's 100K, it's not a strong record. And I don't think it's very long until we see somebody go under 6 hours. So that was my instead of going niche and focusing because I wanted a pro career, I should have focused on the shorter distances, stayed in a job, stayed in a career, focused on getting faster, focused on winning bigger races, and then moved up in distance. So if you get anything from this, please, as always, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you've got any questions about that, please drop them in the comments below.